Question. I find it occasionally confusing whether an impulse comes from the masters or what is only the concept or colored belief that masks itself as what the masters would say, and this creates doubt in me and almost freezes me from making a choice. I know I have been dealing with this fear of being wrong, and where I have followed the strict guidelines by authority, especially in my past lives. I recognize also almost like a fear of the angry God who comes and punishes me for my wrong choices. These reactions are probably all coming from my past lives because I have not been religious at all in this lifetime, and I haven't been indoctrinated into religious beliefs. I have also rebelled against this angry God in the sky authority throughout my life by always opposing authority and creating other separate selves based on this. Can you shed some light on this issue? For I sense I am not alone with these separate selves or even some mass entity that pulls on people's minds. Well, the essence of the question, as I see it, is that when you are a spiritual person, it's because you're using your intuition. And with intuition, I mean something that's beyond the rational thinking mind. It's an inner knowing where you just sense that, for example, this is what I should do. And so as spiritual people, we are often in the mindset of asking for guidance. And I have met spiritual people from many different backgrounds, but they all have this in common. We're using our intuition, we're asking for guidance. We may be different who we're asking for guidance, where we see the guidance coming from. But most people see it as there's some kind of spiritual presence or being that guides us, that gives us directions. It could be a higher self, it could be ascended masters, it could be spiritual guides, whatever people call it. So the question, of course, becomes, is what we get from within accurate? And can we trust it and use it to make decisions from? So let me first, because it's a very important question, let me first say some general things here. First of all, in order to get accurate directions from your higher self or from your spiritual teachers, you have to have spiritual protection. Your mind and your energy field and your chakras have to be sealed from all this influence coming from the outside. And the influence can be other people around you that want you to influence. It can be the mass consciousness, as the question mentions, and it can be various dark forces who are trying to derail your spiritual progress. I talk about this in several videos. So I would always recommend that if you're concerned about getting more accurate directions from within, you use the spiritual tools that the Ascended Masters have given. You use especially the decree or invocation that is in my spiritual toolbox playlist to Archangel Michael and to the Elohim Astrea. Archangel Michael can seal your aura, and Astrea can cut you free from any ties to lower forces or other people. So if you use those tools, then that's a good starting point. That will make your intuition more accurate for most people. But still, even so, you can have been on the path for many years, you can have been invoking spiritual protection for many years, but you can still, of course, have this doubt about, is it coming from a higher source or is it coming from my own subconscious mind? And as I explained in several videos, many videos, we have in our subconscious minds, in our emotional, mental, and identity levels, we have these structures, these reactionary patterns, these subconscious selves, and they are also seeking to derail our spiritual progress, because when we make spiritual progress, we gradually get rid of these selves and they don't want to die. So it can certainly happen that if you have a very strong subconscious self, that it can distort the directions you get from within, or at least the way you interpret the directions. So the question is very valid. Now, what the questioner describes especially is this fear of being wrong. And in past lifetimes, the person has strictly followed these guidelines given by authority. And there's also the fear of the angry God who will punish us for the wrong choices. And these are things that I, over the years, have dealt with myself. I've seen many spiritual people deal with it, especially people from a religious background. But as the questioner says, we've all been in a religious environment in past lives. So what I explain in my... I actually explain a lot of this in my playlist about the avatar psychology. So if you have this issue, of dealing with this issue, I think you should watch the videos in that playlist where I talk more in depth about these issues. But what I will say here is this, that as I explained in my video about how the world was created, there are these beings, I call them fallen beings, who are trying to control everybody on earth. And one of the main reasons they have, or the main ways they are seeking to control us, is that they have projected very aggressively for a very long period of time on earth that there is this standard we have to live up to, a standard for what's right and wrong. And the standard is defined in this world, it's defined by them, but they often project that it's defined by some higher authority, including God. So as I've said before, the Old Testament God, the angry being in the sky, who is looking down on us, judging everything we do, and ready to send us to hell if we make a mistake, that angry God is a creation of these fallen beings. There is no angry God like that. The Creator is not like that. So they have used this image of the angry God, and the many religions that believe in this kind of a God, to project this into the collective consciousness. So there's an extremely strong momentum of, first of all, thinking there is an institution on earth, a religion on earth, that has defined the standard for what's right and wrong. And if you do the wrong thing, the angry, punishing God in the sky will punish you very severely after you leave embodiment by sending you to eternal torment in hell, or whatever it may be. And it's very, very strong. And as spiritual people, of course, we are facing the challenge of freeing ourselves from it. It's just an inevitable part of the spiritual path. I've talked about it before, how there are certain levels of consciousness on earth, and you start the spiritual path at a certain level. But there's at a higher level, there is like a turning point where you really log into what the spiritual path is all about. And it's especially after you, or right around the time where you're making this turning point, you have to deal with this fear of the angry God in the sky, because it's such a strong momentum on earth. And what happens is that in order to get to the higher levels of the spiritual path, you have to be willing to go within and get your directions from within, make your decisions based on your own inner sense. You can't rely on an outer authority when you get to the higher levels of the path. And this is what the questioner describes very accurately. So what you see is in a lot of spiritual people, I mean, the questioner describes here, I have also rebelled against this angry God in the sky authority throughout my life, by always opposing authority and creating other separate selves based on this. And that's a very good observation, because I've seen it in myself and other people. We are suspicious of authority as spiritual people. We are often very suspicious of worldly authority. And the reason for this is actually quite simple. I don't know if you've ever noticed these militant atheists. They started back in 2006, especially when a man named Richard Dawkins published a book called The God Delusion. And there were these 4 people that became publicly known for some years, and they thought in their arrogance that they could give all these rational reasons and talk about all the problems with religion, and it would end the era of religion on earth. They would simply get rid of religion. But that, of course, hasn't happened. So my point for this is that if you ask yourself, if you look at these people, these militant atheists, why are they so angry with religion, especially the Christian religion? And you can also see that there are many spiritual people that they're not as angry with religion usually, but they are very distrustful of religion. They really don't trust, especially the Christian religion. And the answer for me is very simple when you accept reincarnation. Because you go back, and there was a time where, for a big part of the world, the Catholic Church was the dominant religion. And what is the promise made by the Catholic Church? It is, if you're a member of the church, if you follow all the outer rules, if you obey the clergy, do the rituals and sacraments, you're guaranteed to go to heaven after this one lifetime. So a lot of people have believed that. And then, of course, the body dies, the soul goes to some realm and now finds out, oh, I'm not going to go to heaven. I have to come back into embodiment because I haven't resolved the psychology. And some people, I think, have gone through this several times. In other words, believing in the promise, and then the body dies, and your being finds out that you're not going to go to heaven after one lifetime, you have to come back into embodiment. And after having done this enough times, the next time you come back into embodiment, you have this very deep distrust of the Christian religion. You don't remember what happened in your past life, but you come with this deep distrust because you have realized that they're making an empty promise. It's simply a wrong promise. It's a completely flawed promise created by the fallen beings. And so, to me, this explains the extreme anger that some of these atheists have, but it also explains the distrust that many spiritual people have. And so it's something we have to deal with. And to me, the way I dealt with it, it took a long time because it wasn't something it wasn't like I sat down and said, okay, now I have to resolve this. But I just gradually did it over time. And the way I came to deal with it was that I had the Ascended Master teachings. I realized through a series of inner insights, intuitive insights, that nothing on earth can stop my spiritual progress or my ascension, my entry into the spiritual realm. Nothing on earth can stop it unless I allow it to. And when I realized that I don't really have to be angry or frustrated with these fallen beings or with the outer churches or authorities, because it's like Jesus said, what is that to thee? Follow thou me. In other words, the determining factor of whether I go to heaven or not is whether I have integrated with the one mind, what's also called the Christ mind, that is behind everything. And that's what Jesus meant. It wasn't him as a person you have to follow the Christ mind. So, in other words, we all have, as I've explained in many videos, we all have access to the Christ mind directly within ourselves. And therefore we don't need the outer authority. It's simply the fallen beings who are trying to create this belief in us and instill this belief in us that we need an external authority in order to enter heaven. But that's a complete fallacy. And when I really realized that, I really saw that, I could let go of the anger and the distrust. It didn't matter to me anymore. Okay, so I kind of got sidetracked a little bit because the essence of the question here is that how do I know what to do? How do I know whether what's coming to me from the inside, now that I have, getting over this, wanting to listen to outer authorities, how do I know whether this is accurate? And as I said, it depends partly on whether you're protected and sealed, so you don't have any lower forces from the outside projecting thoughts into your mind. But still, you can do all the protection you want, but the protection from Archangel Michael can't negate your free will. So you can actually have these subconscious selves that are still influencing you. And so how do you deal with that? Well, there's a couple of things that I would say here. So it's occasionally confusing whether an impulse comes from the masters or what is only the concept or colored belief that masks itself as what the masters would say. And this is very understandable. I have, of course, dealt with this myself. Because we go through a certain twilight zone, a certain interim period, where we are beginning to get accurate directions. But not every direction we get from within is from a higher source, whether it's our higher self or the masters. And this can be kind of subtle. But the first thing I would say as a general piece of advice here is that I stopped many years ago asking my higher self or the ascended masters what I should do in particular situations, because of a couple of things. I realized, first of all, it is my responsibility to decide. And maybe I should even step back a little bit, because as I said, I realized that it was the fallen beings who created this standard of right and wrong. And after I had realized this, it took me some years where I really had to ponder this. At the time, I didn't really know that it was the fallen beings who created the standard. But I realized that there was something wrong with having this standard. And in the previous Ascended Master organization I was in, there was this very strong concept of the will of God. In other words, even though this organization taught about fallen beings, their influence on religion, it still had this image that there is this God in the sky who has a will for us, a will for what I should do or what I shouldn't do. And it actually, I have talked about this before, it actually came to, I had a period there where I was really considering this, the will of God. So is there really a being in the sky, even if it's not the angry God from the Old Testament, but is there a God in the sky or the Ascended Masters who are looking at everything I do, every decision I make, and they have a will for what I should do? And I intuitively rebelled against it, but I hadn't freed myself from it. So one day I simply sat down and I said, okay, God, show me what your will is for me and I will do it. And then my mind felt completely still. I went into this, what I call a neutral state of mind. And the answer I got back, not a booming voice from heaven, but for inside myself was, what if the will of God for you is that you make your own decisions? And it shocked me at the time. Now, this is a number of years ago, but it really shocked me because I hadn't quite thought about this. And so it took me a while to realize, as I've explained in several videos, that free will is the underlying reality, the underlying law. So there isn't a God up there, there isn't an Ascended Master up there who's looking down at Kim Michaels, having this standard for what Kim Michaels should do, and ticking off the box here and the negative there. It's just not that way. I realized that I have free will as the individual I am right now. And it's actually my opportunity to make choices based on the awareness I have right now, even though my awareness is limited. Because that's how I learn, that's how I grow, and the purpose for my entire existence is growth. In other words, it isn't the purpose that I do specific things and don't do other things. The purpose is that I make a decision with the level of consciousness I have right now, and then I evaluate the results of it and use that to raise my consciousness. Because the purpose of my life is that all of the outer things on earth really are secondary. The primary thing in my life is my growth, my transcendence. So even if I make what seems like a mistake, if I learn from it and use it to raise my consciousness, it wasn't a mistake because I grew from it. And that's the whole purpose of being here. So this was one thing. I kind of, in myself, I overcame the sense that I'm walking on this knife edge, and if I step a little too far to that side, the angry God in the sky is going to condemn me. So it was like I overcame this sense of I can do the right thing or the wrong thing, and it's terrible to do the wrong thing. But then I also started realizing that in order to get good directions, well, what I started realizing after this is that it's meaningless for me to ask my higher self or the ascended masters, what should I do in a given situation? Because they don't have this preconceived standard for what I should or shouldn't do. What I should do in a given situation is what I decide to do. But what I can do is I can ask my higher self and my ascended teachers to give me clarity, and especially to help me see something in my own psychology that influences my decision. So I realized that in the situations where I made a decision that turned out to be not the best possible, it was because something in my psychology, some subconscious self, some unresolved psychology, pulled me in that direction. I couldn't see clearly. And so what I started doing was asking the Ascended Masters and my higher self for directions to see this in specific situations. But I also, after I had done that for some time, I also came to realize that in order to get an accurate decision or direction from above, and in order to make the best possible decision, I had to be in a neutral state of mind. And I started realizing this. I started getting better at recognizing that in many situations there was a pull on me from my own consciousness, in other words, from a subconscious self, that was pulling on me to make a certain decision, to do this and not do that. And I started recognizing this in myself, that whenever I would simply just center in my heart, close my eyes, center in my heart, and you can just sort of scan your mind, and you can just sense, is there something that's pulling on me to go in a certain direction, to do this particular thing, because it seems like I have to do this. There's some obsessive compulsive pull that I should do this. And it can be for all kinds of reasons. It could be like, oh, it's the right thing to do, or blah, blah, blah. This is what God would want you to do, or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But there's a pull, and I started getting better and better at recognizing this. And I think that most spiritual people who come to a point where they even consider this question, because again, there's a certain point in the path where you're not considering this question, you're not ready for it. But when you come to the point where you're considering this question, is what I get from within accurate or not, you're at the point where you can quickly learn to scan your mind and see if there's anything that's pulling on your conscious mind to make a certain direction or decision. And then I realized very quickly, there's some unresolved psychology there. Because really, in order for you to make the best possible decision in a given situation, you need to be neutral. You need to have a neutral look at the situation. I look back at my life, I see many, many situations where it was like there was this pressure on me to make a decision. And there was conflicting influences, or there was the fear that I could make the wrong decision. But I look back at my life and I see every time I made a decision that I later regretted, it was because I gave in to this pressure. I wasn't neutral. I felt, oh, I have to do this for whatever reason. So that's why I realized that in order to make the best possible decisions, I have to be neutral. And if I'm not neutral, I need to go after what it is in my psychology. The same thing if I ask for directions from the Ascended Masters, the more neutral I am, the better I can hear the answer. Because again, you can scan yourself and you can say, do you want the Masters to give you a certain answer? Because the ego, when you hear about Ascended Masters, the ego can very quickly get to a point where it will try to make you believe that this is what the Ascended Masters want for you. And I look back at my many years on the path, and I can see I did it myself for a time. I've seen many other people do it. I remember One time I had a person I knew in a Summit Lighthouse. He had just bought a new car. And he said, well, he was out and he looked at this car and then he thought, you know, this looks like it was blue. And of course in the Summit, the main master was El Moya, who was the first ray, which is the blue ray. And he said when he saw this car, he thought, this looks like a car that El Moya wants me to have. And quite frankly, I sincerely doubt that the Ascended Master El Moya, who is now the Ascended Master Moore, wanted this particular person to have that particular car. I don't think this was something that El Moya was engaged in, because I think El Moya looked at it that it was up to him to make the decision. So what I'm saying is, this man, his ego, used the Ascended Master to justify the decision that he wanted to make. He just didn't want to recognize, I want that car. And I see the same thing in myself at the time, because I was also in that period there. I see so many other people, especially in the Summit, but even also later, that we are wanting to use the Ascended Masters to justify what we want to do. We are just not at the point yet where we have taken full responsibility for ourselves, so that we can say, this is what I want to do. So we want some external authority to tell us this. Of course, you see this all over. Religious people, spiritual people, you know, where they use a guru, they use Jesus, they use the Bible as a justification for what people want to do. And that's what I'm trying to say. There is a, if you look at the world, there are people in the world who never want to make personal decisions. They want to refer to some outer authority. This can be the Bible, it can be the Communist Party in the Soviet Union, it can be scientists, experts, a political figure, whatever. They don't want to make decisions. Then there comes this interim phase where spiritual people, we are engaging in the spiritual path. We are attempting to connect to our higher self and higher presence, to get a higher perspective that allows us to make decisions. As I've said before, once you see yourself as a connected being, you know you're connected to something outside your own mind, you have a frame of reference from outside your own mind. So in other words, we could say that the people who are not making their decisions, they have no inner connection to the higher selves. So they have no frame of reference from outside their own mind. So that's why they are referring to some authority in the world, tell me what to do. Then when we start the spiritual path, we go into this interim period that can be quite long and quite difficult, where we have some intuition from our higher selves, but we're still not quite ready to take full responsibility for making our own decisions. And that's why we often get it mixed up. So what I'm trying to say is that what the questioner is asking about, does it come from the masters, or does it come from a colored belief that masks itself as what the masters would say? And so we will have this mixture for a while, and I remember having it for quite a number of years, where I can look back and say that I also had certain things where I thought, oh, this is what I should do, this is what the masters would want, but it wasn't. It was just coming from my own unresolved psychology. And so then there can come this period, the third phase, where now we are beginning to see. In other words, in the interim period there, we're not really willing to see, we're not ready to see that this is our own unresolved psychology. But now comes the next phase where we're beginning to see this. This is unresolved psychology, and that's then when we can really make some progress by looking at this. You look at a particular situation. It doesn't have to be one you're facing right now, but if you're facing a difficult situation, yes, you can do it, of course, but often it's easier to look at something that happened in the past where you've got it a little bit at a distance. And you can ask yourself, why did I make that decision? Can I recognize that when I made the decision, there was something pulling on my conscious mind to make that particular decision? And then you can go after and say, what was that? And it was, as I said, a subconscious self, unless you were influenced by some dark forces, but when you get to these levels, you're not as influenced by that. So you can say, okay, What is that self? What is the belief that the self have that made it seem like this is what I should do? Or even, this is what the Ascended Masters or God wanted me to do. And then you can gradually start resolving that, and you can switch your whole attitude where you realize that the spiritual path really is not about coming to a point where now there's an Ascended Master that will tell you what is the right thing to do in every situation, so you're never doing anything wrong. The spiritual path is about coming to a point where you are willing to make your decisions based on what you can see right now, based on the level of consciousness you are at right now. And then you learn from that and you grow. So as I talked about, the 144 levels of consciousness, and what I'm talking about here is that we find the spiritual path at the 48th level. People below the 48th level, they are the ones who just want some external authority to tell them what to do. From the 48th to the 96th level, we are in this interim phase. We get some accurate intuition, but we're not quite ready to take responsibility for ourselves. And that's why you see many spiritual people, they find a spiritual movement, they want to follow a guru. They want the guru to tell them what to do. And you even see some that go to astrologers or psychics or whatever to, be told what to do. But then as we get closer to the 96th level, we become more and more willing to look at ourselves to make our own decisions. But you don't really make it beyond the 96th level unless you really come to this point where you are accepting, I'm willing to make decisions and take responsibility for those decisions. I don't want the Ascended Master to tell me what to do, because I'm willing to look, if I'm at the, say you're at the 95th level. You're willing to make a decision based on what you could see at the 96th level. See, what people are asking when they're asking the masters to tell them what to do, they are saying, oh, I see that there are Ascended Masters up there, and they can see what I can't see at my level of consciousness. So I want them to tell me what is the right thing to do so I can be sure I always do the right thing. But you see, there's no standard like that, okay? If you are at the 64th level of consciousness, for example, the right thing for you to do in a given situation is to make a decision based on the 64th level of consciousness and what you see. And then when you see the outcome of the decision, you can say, okay, was there something in my consciousness that influenced me making that decision? And if I look at that and expose that self, then I can grow to the 65th level of consciousness. Then I can see more, and you keep doing this. So again, at the 95th level, you need to make a decision at that level of consciousness. Then you evaluate the decision, and that helps you go to the 96th level, and so forth and so on. That's how we grow. But we can't accept that between the 48th and the 96th level, but at around the 96th level, we can come to the point we can accept this and say, okay, enough about this, wanting someone outside of myself to tell me what to do. I'm willing to make my decisions, look at the result, look at the reaction I have to the result, and look at the reaction I had to the situation. Why did I make that particular decision? And why do I have the reaction I'm having to the decision? And that shows me what kind of an unresolved self I have at my particular level of consciousness. And when I see that self and overcome it, I rise to the next level. And I just keep doing this as long as I'm in embodiment. I have long ago given up this idea that's so popular in spiritual movements, that I can come, while I'm still in physical embodiment, I could come to this ultimate level of consciousness. And now I'm enlightened, or in unity consciousness, or the Christ consciousness, and this and that. You do have a higher level of consciousness when you go beyond the 96th level. But it's not ultimate, because how are we ever going to ascend? I remember in the summit, there was this culture of people thinking that, oh, I just keep doing the violet flame to transmute my karma, and I keep doing what the masters want us to do, doing all these decree services and this and that, and then one day it's like, poof, I'm just going to ascend because Serapis Bey is going to come and accelerate my aura, and I'm going to ascend and this and that. But the ascension is a decision. It's the final decision you are going to make on earth. Because when you, the conscious you, decides to ascend, you're leaving the earth behind permanently and forever. And that's why I've said there can't be anything unresolved in your consciousness that ties you to earth, such as a separate self. Even the separate selves you have at the 144th level of consciousness. You still have a separate self there that makes you think that it's important to be an embodiment. And you have to let that self die in order to leave being an embodiment permanently, forever, irrevocably. So we are always, as long as we're an embodiment, there's always another subconscious self to look at so we can rise to the next level of consciousness. And once you accept that, you just make the decisions. And you're not thinking about, is it right or wrong? You see, what is my reaction? What can I learn from it? How can I grow? And you're not paralyzed, you know, as the questioner says here. It creates doubt in me and almost freezes me from making a choice. I, of course, recognize that in myself. I had that for a long time dealing with that. Sometimes I would, you're paralyzed, you know. But there comes a point where you accept what I've talked about here. It just fades away. You're not paralyzed. I haven't for years been afraid of making choices. I haven't had that sense of paralysis. I recognize it from the past, of course. I had it for a long time. But it's been quite a while. I can't even remember how long it's been where I haven't had that. And it is partly because I have done this, as I said. I strive to go into a neutral state of mind. And many times, as I've also said in some videos, I'm not really making a decision with the outer mind. It's just that as I go into neutral, and as I look at the situation from a neutral perspective, it just becomes obvious, yeah, I'm doing this. It doesn't become obvious, yeah, this is the right thing to do. I don't even think that way anymore. I'm just thinking, I am doing this. And it is, of course, a choice I'm making. But it's just not a choice with the outer mind. It's not a choice that I'm pulled into making. And so, I know this is a rambling, long answer, but the essence of it is this. The more neutral you can be, the better directions you get. But even so, even if you get the best possible directions, your I Am Presence and your Ascended Masters are not going to tell you what to do in specific situations. So you have to be neutral, but also be willing to make your decisions. And then look at your reaction to the outcome of the decisions and why you made that decision. What was your reaction that caused you to make that decision? Then you can expose the subconscious selves you have left, and we all have subconscious selves left, or we would not be in embodiment. Okay? I know this is contrary to every spiritual movement out there. Because every spiritual movement I've ever seen, they always believed that the founder of the movement was in the highest possible state of consciousness, and therefore didn't have any subconscious selves left. And the realization I eventually came to when I went into a neutral state of mind was, it's just not the case. It's just not the case. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't many spiritual teachers who have overcome what we normally call ego. They're not selfish. They're not self-centered. They're not taking advantage of people and this and that. There are many, many spiritual people, even if they weren't spiritual teachers, who have overcome that level of ego. But I'm just saying, there is still something we have to look at. And when you accept that, it's kind of like I said, the fallen beings have tried to project this standard of right and wrong. And implicit in projecting that standard, they're also projecting that it's possible for people to come to a point where this person is now in such a high state of consciousness, whatever he does is always right. Because that's what the fallen beings want people to believe about them. They want to set themselves up as this unquestionable authority, because that person is always right. And it's just a myth, it's just a lie, it's just something they have created, an image they've created. But many spiritual people, many spiritual movements, even many spiritual gurus, they've adopted this fallen idea. And they think, oh yeah, I have now reached that point where whatever I do is always right. And, you know, again, when you reach a certain level of consciousness, you are capable of looking at this and saying, but do I want to be tied by this? Because, you see, if you believe that it's possible to come to a point where you're always right, you're going to believe that about yourself. And you're going to believe that this is what should happen as you rise higher on the spiritual path. And this has caused people, I have met some of these people, I have seen some of these people, they come to believe this, and now they are saying, but I don't need to look at myself and my reactions anymore. Because whatever I did must be right. And then instead of looking at, why did I make that decision? What does that show about my unresolved psychology? Now they're trying to come up with some excuse for why it was right. And it is often, if it's an ascended master movement, oh, the masters must have told the guru to do this. Or it was a test for the students that the guru had to do this. All kinds of excuses you can come up with. But what does it show? It shows that the guru, who claims to be in a higher state of consciousness and can tell the students what to do, the guru hasn't taken full responsibility for making his or her own decisions. I mean, come on. You know, I have seen this in spiritual movements, how this plays out. And probably many spiritual people have seen it. So can't we just come to a point where we just let it go? We just let the whole thing go. I talked about in another video about people idolizing a spiritual teacher, and this is what happens when you idolize people. You end up idolizing yourself, and what I'm saying is, you can't get accurate directions if you still have remnants of this consciousness where you think you should come to a point where now you're always making right decisions. You can only get the best possible directions and overcome this paralysis if you let go of the whole idea that there are right decisions and wrong decisions. It's just a matter of making a decision, seeing the outcome, seeing if you have a reaction to it. What does that say about your psychology? Then you deal with that psychology, then you grow to the next level. What's the mystery here? But I recognize that it took me, I don't know, 40 years maybe? Certainly over 30 years on the spiritual path to see this and come to accept it. So I realize there are some people that are not able to grasp it, that's fine. But if you can ask this question, you are ready to grasp it. You know, that it is really just a matter of switching. But it can take time, of course, to switch. But it's switching the mind and coming to the point where you're in other words, if you feel paralysis about making decisions, it's because you haven't taken full responsibility for making decisions. And that's because you still have some subconscious self that you haven't looked at squarely in the eye. You haven't basically overcome this standard, this idea of making the right or wrong choices or the punishing God. And it's, I think if you, again, you know, it's my realization at a certain point is that when you come to a point where you can ask the question, you are ready. You're ready to overcome it. Because otherwise you couldn't see it. So it's just a matter of looking in the psychology, what do I have left? Why do I have this idea of the angry God who comes and punishes me for my wrong choices? And seeing that this is a separate self. You don't need to see that there's the angry God. There is no angry God. It's just a mental image. But you have a separate self that believes it. And you can come to see the self and say, I'm letting you die. I don't believe in you anymore. I don't need you. I don't want you. Go.